Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. We've got another Arcade Attack podcast where today we're going to be addressing true arcade royalty. More on that in a second.
Me?
But...
Hello.
No.
Arcade royalty.
You see, it's normally Adrian interrupting me, but Dylan's done it first this time. But first, I'm going to tell you who I'm here with. And Dylan's already introduced himself. But we have the Dillmeister. Say hello.
Hello, everyone.
We have the adiest of Adrians.
Yeah, how you doing, mate?
And we've got the Keefiest of Keefs.
Heavy machine gun.
Yes! Welcome, chaps. How are we?
Not bad.
Good.
Not bad. Is that it?
I'm great.
I'm going to get the excitement going up in here today. So I mentioned arcade royalty, yeah? And I don't say that lightly. That's going to be on the menu today for today's podcast. I wasn't lying, all right? We're going to take a plunge into the depths of an SNK arcade heavyweight, yeah? A game synonymous with fast action, addictive gameplay, a raft of weird and wonderful enemies, and a hardcore run and gun setting, yeah? Sounds pretty hardcore. Mm-hmm. Today, chaps, we're going to talk about none other than the epic Metal Slug. How do we feel about that?
Oh, it's better than Wooden Snail.
Wooden Snail.
How long have you been cooking that? I was looking at him waiting.
Aluminium crab. So, fellas, regale me with your extensive Metal Slug experience. This is where they all smile very nervously. So, I think I'll start with Adrian because I know that you and your son Tate have been thrashing through some of the titles recently. So, it's pretty fresh, right? What's your experience of Metal Slug?
Well, it's on the Retro Pie, luckily for me. So I think it's got Metal Slugs 1 to 5 and X.
And X.
So
okay.
Tate was like, that's number 10. I'm like, well, maybe. I'm getting a bit confused. I'm sure you'll fill us in later. Mm-hmm. But over the last few weeks, me and Tate have been, what do we complete? We first played Metal Slug 1, smashed it out. Then we played Metal Slug 5.
1 and then 5.
1 and 5.
Controversial.
Then 10, or X. And then 4.
Okay, X isn't actually 10, but yeah, cool.
And
we'll come back to that.
I have played Metal Slug 3 in the past, and I've got a view about Metal Slug 3, but we didn't play that recently. We played that a few months ago. Metal Slug 2, I don't think I've ever played Metal Slug 2 randomly, so Metal Slug 2 is the only one I haven't properly played.
Interesting.
But I really enjoy it, and yeah, that's my gaming history.
Oh, nice. So you played most of the titles then?
Yeah.
So that's cool. So you got a nice little window into the world. Keith, what you played?
I can't remember when I first played it, you know. I've been racking my brain. I don't know if I did actually play it in the arcade back when it came out. Or whether, like I've only played it on MAME in recent years.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've played all of them, but mostly the first 3, I think, are the ones I've got the most experience with. And I've played it on the Saturn as well, with the Ram Cart. It's not quite as good as the arcade version, but still pretty awesome.
Is anything as good as the arcade version?
No. But yeah, great games. Love them. And it is one, yeah. When I'm looking down the old MAME list, if I can't find anything to play, Metal Slug.
You always go back to it, don't you?
Yeah.
Excellent. Dylan. Dillmeister.
The first time I played it was when Keith got his Retro Pie.
Oh.
So not at the arcade either?
I missed it, obviously. I never had the money to go to arcades and obviously didn't have any money to get anything above a Master System. So, yeah, I've only started enjoying it in recent years. But
it's an interesting one for various different reasons because you're probably not alone in terms of not playing it in the arcade maybe, or certainly not having like the home system and et cetera, and there's a few reasons for that, and we'll come on to that a bit later on. But we've got to get some meat on those bones, yeah? Where did it come from? What is it? You know, why is it so weird and wacky and different and crazy, and why does it keep coming, getting us to come back time after time? So we've got to jump in whatever time machine you want to use. I think on a previous podcast you used the DeLorean. We could get in the TARDIS.
We only use that for Year of Gaming. It can only be used a few times a year.
So the TARDIS or the Time Stone or whatever it is we're going to use.
The Rosetta Stone.
Oh, Jesus. This is going to haunt us forever now, isn't it, this thing? This and blooming Game Pass with Dylan is going to forever haunt us. So this time we've got to go all the way back to 1974.
What? No.
Yeah? Yes.
Check your notes, James.
No, I'm checking my notes and it says here 1974, and I'll tell you for why. There was a new video game company founded called IPM. And they were an arcade cabinet manufacturer, okay, 1974. They very soon became IREM, okay?
IREM.
Remember IREM?
Yes.
Yeah.
We spoke
Yeah.
about
We love
IREM.
IREM.
Ninja Baseball Batman, baby.
R-Type.
Yes.
And R-Type.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah, it's a baseball Batman.
And R-Type, yeah. That's a small game.
They were known as then International Rental Electronics Machines. Okay.
That's what it stands
Which obviously fits with, the whole arcade cabinet thing. So titles from IREM include, we've obviously said a couple there, but Kung Fu Master. Mm-hmm. Classic. Mm-hmm. Potentially the first
Scrolling beat 'em up.
Yeah.
potentially the side, one of the, probably argued as the first side-scrolling beat 'em up. Load Runner. And the
sounds
R-Type
familiar.
series. Yeah, R-Type series. Massively successful. I know, Age, you love that one, don't you? You love a bit of R-Type.
Mate.
You just love it.
Maybe we should do a pod on it one day. I just remember playing it on the Spectrum, and I was like, "What is this? This is like the best." It was the first best game I've ever seen in my life. If that makes sense.
It looks so good, and it looked so good back then. It still plays so well now, so I don't blame you. But yeah, that was during the 80s. But as they progressed through the 80s, they changed their name to Innovations in Recreational Electronic Media.
Oh, okay.
So
Kept
letters
the
are the
acronym.
same.
Yeah.
But, so plaudits to those guys because they weren't renting anymore, obviously. So there we go. As IREM moved into the 90s, they actually saw a splinter of developers peeling off and create their own games outside of the main studio. These include games called Cosmic Cop. Do you know what Cosmic Cop is?
Sounds like a Universal Soldier riff-off.
It does. It's actually a game from the R-Type universe. It's actually very, very similar to, it's sort of a pre-R-Type game.
Wow.
I thought that would be like
never heard of
A-Type
it.
or B-Type or C-Type.
He's here all week, unfortunately. And another one called Undercover Cops. No?
Nope.
Excellent. Meanwhile, IREM, moving through the early 90s, was facing some serious financial issues. They had some problems at the top. They didn't have enough money to make games, but they had to still obviously push them out to save face. So, after releasing a game in 1991 called Gun Force, no, and I'll come on to that. Gun Force is very important. The future was obviously very uncertain. Ironically, Gun Force paved the way in a strange sense for what followed because it's a run and gun side-scrolling shooter with hand-drawn sprites, backdrops, much like the Metal Slugs we know and love. Yeah, so we'll find out a bit more about that in a minute because that's actually a really important point. So back to the devs that had been working on the side projects. They kind of realised at this point that they were onto something. Yeah, because they were making a success of this. Couple this with the fact that they'd become pretty frustrated because IREM were moving at a really slow pace. They weren't releasing stuff as quickly as they should, and they weren't developing things as fast as they should.
I remember when they were much quicker.
Hey, there he is again. He's here for the dad jokes. So they put their foot down and they went, stuff this, we're going to go and make our own company. So they did. They formed their own company. Anyone want to hazard a guess as to what this company was called?
SNK?
No.
Oh.
No, this is where it gets interesting.
Okay.
Company was called Nazca. No?
Sounds like a racing car competition.
Nazca.
It is Nazca indeed, and they decided they would create and develop games for the Neo Geo MVS arcade system. And their very first title was, and you guys have a review of this.
What?
We have a review of this. I should
I've
say.
done it, haven't I? Have I done it?
What is it?
What Neo
I
Geo
don't
games?
know.
Neo Turf Masters.
Oh,
Neo
what a
Turf.
game.
Ah, there you go.
Oh, that's
Dino
a
loves it.
great game.
Dino loves
It is
it.
great games. Great golf games.
It's one of our first YouTube reviews.
Yes.
So feel free to check our YouTube channel out.
And that was essentially Nazca, this kind of splinter of developers that had kind of moved away from IREM and formed their own new company in 1994. So, yeah, and they decided enough was enough. They were going to start creating their own games. And, by all accounts, I'm pretty sure Neo Turf Masters was a quite a good game. So, not played it myself, but I hear there's a lot of love for it. So, 1994 was actually a crucial year in regards to what happened next. Not only did IREM officially close down, okay, because they just didn't have the gumption to carry on. But the newly formed Nazca essentially ploughed on with a new production list and created the sequel to Gun Force, which had a really imaginative title. It was called
Gun Force 2.
It was called Gun Force 2, yes. Absolutely right. Now, have any of you guys seen, played, heard of Gun Force 2?
No.
Was it released on the Amiga? Or am I talking rubbish?
No, it wasn't.
I'm talking rubbish.
This is where we can, really look at how Metal Slug kind of came about, as it's a direct result of the Gun Force games that it was born.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
And it's interesting because if you know we know the Metal Slug graphics, the gameplay, it's all hard hitting, it's funny, it's all this sort of thing, which we'll come on to in a bit. But if you look at the Gunforce games, you can clearly tell that's where Metal Slug came from. Yeah. So it's a bit of homework for you guys to do. Go and see if you can find Gunforce on your Retro Pies or online. Have a look on YouTube video and stuff. And it's another great looking game. But yeah, I'll kind of tell you what happened. Yeah, it's worth mentioning as a footnote that after IREM closed down in '94, they actually came back in '96. Just doing home console games. But the vast majority of them were reworkings of R-Type games. There were some other titles in there, lesser known: Disaster Report, Raw Danger, etc.
Cool names.
Yeah,
Wow.
good names, but sadly they didn't have any of the backing of the advertising or anything like that, so they couldn't really sort of be contenders anymore. And they kind of just updated the R-Type games. So they ran out of steam once again and closed down, I think, for good. In 2011. So, an interesting little journey there, but they were a bit slow on the uptake with a lot of their games. Early days they were good, but they ran out of steam. So, are we happy that we've had enough of a little bit of a history lesson about the companies? Yeah. So far.
Who owns the R-Type brand now, out of interest, you know?
Don't know, actually. That's interesting. I know there's been...
We should buy the rights.
There's been some
Probably
newer...
some random, because
Yeah,
obviously Evercade have done an IRM cart now, have they? Or
I think they have. Yeah,
or
I think they have.
maybe Antstream have got loads of IRM stuff. So someone known to those guys must have.
Yeah, I don't know who actually owns it, but I do know that there's iterations of those of R-Type still going on. So because they've done a lot of stuff with mobile as well.
Arcade Attack Type, the video game.
That would be a bad video.
I'd love to say these jokes are getting better. But we need to know who was the driving force behind Metal Slug. Like, why did it come about? Yeah, because we've got the Gunforce games, and you'd think, okay, well, we've got these funky games, and we'll move on to something else. No. Yeah. If you do some searches online, you will find that the production team, designers, etc., of Metal Slug, you'll see a lot of them worked at IREM. Okay, these were the disgruntled devs who basically shot off to make Nazca, and they had a happy sort of coming together with SNK, who decided to fund Nazca.
This is quite
here we go.
interesting because I don't know if you remember when we talked about Ninja Baseball Batman. I said when I first saw it, I thought it was an SNK game because it had that look and that feel, and this explains all
You
that
are
now.
going to feel exactly the
This
same way
explains
about
it
Metal
all.
Slug, yeah. So yeah, SNK were pretty much writing the checks, and Nazca were doing all the legwork. Now this was because SNK were true believers in the fact that the talent came from IREM, and this kind of splinter of devs, etc., were hardworking. They had a vision. They wanted to pump these games out, and IREM as a company never moved that fast. So, it makes sense really. They were picking these guys up and writing the checks. So the project was led by Takashi Nishiyama, who helped create what? Do we know?
I know that
sounds
name.
familiar.
Yeah.
Oh yes, very
I know
familiar.
that name.
What is it? A series of games? A big series.
Well, games, but more a console, more a concept. We talked about it earlier in our little pre-game chat. I'll help you out here.
Yeah, I don't know.
No, it was in fact the Neo Geo MVS arcade
The MVS
system.
arcade system
and the AES home console systems. Yeah, he was also one of the designers for Kung Fu Master. He created the Fatal Fury franchise.
Oh,
Yes.
wow.
Yeah,
Nice.
and also King of Fighters.
Oh, did I mention him in the Scrolling Beat 'em Up podcast when I was going through Fatal Fury? And I think I might have done. That's why his
you
name
didn't.
sounded
James
familiar.
might have as well on the Double Dragon.
You
one,
might
when
have
mentioned
as well.
Kung Fu Master. So maybe that's why it sounds really familiar.
Okay.
There we go. That's ringing bells. It's ringing bells. And he also worked on, taking it back a little bit, he worked on IREM's 1982 release Moon Patrol, which was one of the first games with parallax scrolling.
Ooh.
So
parallax.
he's...
I love
Shadow of the
I love a big
Again, being a Master System boy, didn't see much parallax in the early 90s.
When
When I finally saw some, I was like, hello.
Shadow of the Beast, baby, isn't it?
Shadow of the Beast,
By the time I saw Parallax, I was already a man.
During the war... so some say he was fairly qualified to deliver a market-busting heavy impact shooter to the masses,
Hey,
right?
no.
Yeah, so he had some credentials. Yeah, he had some credentials. This guy was huge, yeah? So the truth is that the development of Metal Slug began kind of indirectly during the creation and release of Gunforce and Gunforce 2, which was 91 to 94. Okay. Both games used a 2D style scrolling shooting framework as a base, and they looked to kind of rival the likes of the Contra franchise. Okay, in terms of being super fast, fast-paced action, difficulty level as well. Pretty difficult as well. Both games were developed and released by IREM on arcade cabinets using their own IREM M92 system. Okay, so this was pre Neo Geo. Okay, so the development of Gunforce 2, however, was pretty shocking, and it was pretty troubled. And they had there were several departments saying they didn't have the time to finish certain graphics or sounds. And apparently it's recorded as being said that the lead designers were really bad at their job. And that's actually quoted. I don't know where that quote comes from, but apparently there's several people that basically were moaning that these guys were just useless. Yeah. It didn't play as well as intended initially, and it suffered a bit of a clunky and a relatively low key release. The biggest criticisms were poor AI and not very good sound. Okay.
Have you played them, James?
I had a brief go on Gunforce 2, but it was only on like a PC emulator. It was only a very basic, but it looks and kind of feels like Metal Slug, but it's like a shadow
It's
of.
a bit of a sluggish version.
Oh yeah, very sluggish. I haven't employed you, have I, to do these blooming dad jokes on this pod, but there we go. So yeah, that's probably why you haven't heard of it, because it had a bit of a pasty release. It wasn't that well known, and it was clunky, to say the best. Yeah. So for all of their issues, though, the Gunforce games featured elements we know, timed levels, streams of various enemies, soldiers, mechanized creatures, and obviously collecting power-ups, drive vehicles, and then defeating bosses at the end of each level. All right. So the basic premise was the same as we know and love. And bosses would usually be, these massive mechanical beasts or machines which would have weak spots, etc., etc. Yeah. Lots and lots of games, use that kind of mechanic. In regards to the look of the Gunforce games, very quirky, and they had sort of hand-drawn backdrops and sprites along with some like ridiculous explosion detail and stuff like that. But that's why we love it. But the next move after IREM had closed was for Nazca to release a new and original. Now, I use the term original very loosely because, as you know, what I'm about to say is, of course, Metal Slug is supposed to be the original game, but it borrowed an absolute shed load of stuff from the Gunforce game. So very shortly after Gunforce 2 was released, they began working on Metal Slug officially to give it its proper name. Does anyone know what the full name is?
No.
Metal Slug.
I think Super Vehicle.
Go on.
001.
Yes! 10 AA points and a jacket potato for Keith.
Matt, you got to start stumping out for these jacket potatoes.
I need to bring like a bag of spuds and cook them.
Sack potato.
I don't think I've won one yet, have I?
No, Adrian has not won a jacket potato, mainly because you keep doing really bad dad jokes.
Yeah, they're going to be so succulent when we eat them.
Dylan's going to go, beans and cheese.
I love beans and cheese on that. Anyway, we digress.
Indeed we do. This is not about metal jacket potatoes, metal slugs. So that's to give it its proper name.
Do you remember?
Full Metal Jacket potatoes.
He was there. James was working.
No, my jokes don't get the round of applause. No, but do you remember at bonfires you used to wrap jacket potatoes in metal foil, didn't you?
Yeah, true.
And actually, that kind of links in a bit to Metal Slug. So. No, it doesn't.
In that the foil is metal. Jesus Christ! Someone say tenuous. Oh my god! I don't know how this happens. It always happens where I'm like halfway through, and all of a sudden Adrian goes, "I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to completely hijack your podcast."
No, but I don't see people doing that much anymore. Do you? When you go to bonfires, you don't see those kind of. I don't know.
Because we did on Cup Cap. It was like Cup Cap,
you know, in Back to the Future 2 when he goes about spearing off into another timeline. Yeah, that's exactly what I feel like.
He just created another timeline.
He has indeed another time. Oh my god. Anyway, so when they when the first version, the sort of pilot version of Metal Slug was shown to management and publishers, it was actually really badly criticised. Okay, you wouldn't have thought. You'd have thought, hang on, they've had 2 games to improve on this, and but it was very short. It had a somber tone, and it was you could only drive the tank with no solo character movement. So it was literally driving the Metal Slug.
Okay.
That was it. There was no other vehicles. There was no solo movement. And that was kind of how it was being played out. And they said there was issues with the story. It didn't really make sense, etc. So it was quite badly criticised, by SNK bosses at, when they did a showing at SNK's Osaka location in 1995. So it basically got panned, and they were like, we've paid all this money and, you've given us this thing and we don't really like it. So what they did was they kind of did a Sonic movie type moment. Yeah. They took the feedback on board and they went, we're going to actually physically change it a lot. Yeah. And they subsequently put it through the grinder, essentially. They produced the Metal Slug arcade game that we know today. Thankfully, we don't know the first iteration of it because it just was poorer than the Gunforce games, by the sound of it. So some of the biggest differences from Gunforce games, and the original iteration of Metal Slug, the polished version, was that the POWs, so you know the little POW sprites that you get, prisoners of war, were now bearded, starving old men who rewarded you for rescue. So originally in Gunforce, they were like shrinking violets. They were damsels in distress, women.
Okay.
So I guess they felt they just couldn't stretch the closet sexism any further, really. So, weapon upgrades, more of them, more varied as well. And they were found a lot more frequently throughout the map. Vehicles ranged massively from small armored tanks to mech type exoskeleton suits and submarines. Okay. All very cool, all hand drawn and just look great. But what it boils down to in the end was essentially two things. So Nazca had funding and direction from experienced names in all the departments from SNK, which is obviously a huge plus for them. And they knew the market, and they had multiple top-selling titles in play, some of which we've already talked about. But because the first iteration of Metal Slug was heavily vetted by SNK bosses, and it was given a massive overhaul, the end result was obviously a lot more market ready. Yeah. Which is interesting, because had we seen the other one, would we even be talking about it now? Definitely not. Yeah. Because it just would have gone into the kind of subpar, not very good arcade game type bargain bin. Yeah. So on the 18th and 19th of April 1996, Metal Slug was released in North America and Japan, so literally a day after one another, on the Neo Geo MVS and the AES home consoles. Was it a success? So that was the thing. We'll come back to this, but what's your initial kind of knee-jerk reaction when I ask you, was it a success when it was released?
I don't think anyone would have known about it. Maybe it wasn't initially.
Yeah, it's a brand new name, and it wasn't a sequel or anything. I don't know. Plus,
it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because they had two games there that were, the kind of prerequisites and predecessors, and they had enough time to develop it, and it was SNK funded, and
it's about marketing though. Was it marketed well?
Well, this is the thing. But I mean, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because you just assume knee jerk is, it's Metal Slug.
Must have been.
But there was a lot of turmoil leading up to actually creating the game, change of companies, funding, and all sorts of stuff. So, having done the sort of research on this, I thought it was an SNK game.
Yeah.
It's not. It's a Nazca game. It's actually because SNK and Nazca were two separate entities. Yeah. And I'm pretty sure everybody, or not everybody, but I would imagine a majority of people listening would think it's SNK because they plastered their name all over the cabinets, Well, so there we go. So a bit of a roller coaster of production, and maybe not as an organic creation as maybe we first thought, because it was a love child of the two Gunforce games. They are worth tracking down and play if you can find them, even on emulators and stuff like that, just to see like a clunky version of Metal Slug.
Yeah, definitely.
So that kind of brings us up to the release. We'll talk about kind of how successful it was, but does anyone know the basic kind of story? Because we haven't sort of said anything about what this is.
Blow the living hell out of everything.
Is it?
Yes.
Yeah, is it a nondescript war you're fighting in? I don't think they've never actually said exactly what war you're fighting. Is that true, or am I talking rubbish?
It is a war, essentially. Yeah, absolutely. It's a sort of a campaign. Yeah.
Yeah.
But do we know who it's against, what it's for, why they did it?
I've honestly never thought that hard about it.
No, just blow the living hell out of it.
Kill the bad guys.
It's quite interesting when you know the story, because when you look at some of the bosses and then some of the characters that pop up like in between all the scenes and stuff.
There is a character, and I'm going to say it looks a little bit like Saddam Hussein.
Yeah.
I don't know if
There's
that's the
several
first
characters that
Metal
look
Slug.
like
Is
that
it
in
based
the desert level.
on the Gulf War?
The first one isn't, is it?
So, well, I'll tell you. So, actually, for an arcade game, the story is quite relatively beefy.
Okay.
Which you'd think for a run and gun shooter, you'd think we don't really need a beefy storyline, but it kind of makes sense.
the Walker Pod? That story went on for.
Well, this is quite brief compared to that, but it does have some interesting elements in it. So the year is 2028. Now that's hitting too close to home because we're 6
Is this
years
Walker again?
we're sitting only 6 years away from that when this pod recorded. So we have General Donald Morden. Adrian was thinking I was going to say Trump. No. General Donald Morden, and he essentially goes rogue and he amasses a force to overthrow the regular army. All right. He wants to install a new world order, like all crazy guys do.
Yeah.
As it happened, he managed to defeat all but a small pocket of the regular army who were taken by surprise. Yeah, so they didn't know what was coming to them. So the regular army soldiers that were left, they did plan a comeback by converting their Metal Slug tank prototypes into combat-ready status. But once again, General Morden and his forces, they learned about it, they crushed it, and they essentially scattered the vehicles across several locations, which is why in a lot of the games you find them in all sorts of parts of levels and stuff like that. So it's pretty much completely random. But you've got two people who essentially were prepared to step up. Yeah, do we know the names of any of the characters?
I've just been playing it so recently, I always forget the names.
So, First Lieutenant Marco Rossi.
Marco Rossi.
And Second Lieutenant Tama Roving of the Peregrine Falcons Special Ops Unit. So they take action. They basically rally up a load of regular army troops. And they say, right, let's go. We're gonna do some commando tactics and guerrilla tactics, and they take on the rebellion and neutralise its or sought to neutralise the leader, General Morden. The secondary objective is to basically make sure they collect the Metal Slug tanks and the vehicles, yeah, because they don't want them destroyed, but they will destroy them if they can't get them back because they don't want the enemy using them, obviously, yeah. So that's where all the chaos comes from in the game. So after various campaigns, the regular army defeats the rebellion. So deep. And captures Morden, where he is jailed in a maximum security prison. Marco and Tama are heroes, of course, although do we think that's the last we see of General Morden?
No.
He comes back often.
Of course it's not. We know that because there's been multiple sequels. So we've already thrashed through a stack of the gameplay elements when we looked at development. So this section, we're going to open it up a little bit, yeah, because I know everyone's played it, yeah, and everyone's probably got different views on it, and they've played different levels, different parts, different all this sort of thing, yeah. So we know it's a 2D platform run and gun shooter, where you need to defeat a constant stream of enemies and bosses, okay? You use power-ups, weapon upgrades, vehicles, etc. So there are so many enjoyable, fun and crazy elements of the game. I wanted to kind of reminisce with you guys about like the best parts of it, yeah, because we've not really talked about that just yet. So we'll have a look at the sequels to the first game that it spawned in a little while, but there's two sort of parts that I wanted to share, and then I'll kind of throw it open to you guys, but that I absolutely love about it. So the one that springs to mind is one of the bosses, and you've probably seen this, Adrian, because you played number 3, right? It's this giant like mutated rocket launcher hermit crab, yeah? I don't know what they were smoking, right? When they thought this thing up. This is, it looks horrendous. You're literally running along this little pier, right? And you've got these POWs going, thank you, and they just get swallowed up by this thing. And it's like this giant hermit crab with this array of rocket launchers on his back.
Brilliant.
I mean, what? You know,
I love it. The bosses are great, aren't they? In all the games.
I know. I mean, that one in particular sticks in mind, but that just kind of like sets the tone, because that's like the first boss in number 3, and it's just mental. I mean, you basically go, what the hell is that? And then you just start laughing, you know, because it's just a comedy moment, and then you start smashing buttons to try and shoot it. The second one that gets me every time is the rate of fire on some of the guns. Yeah, like when you get the heavy machine gun, it's so over the top,
amazing, love it.
And the voice, heavy machine gun.
Yeah.
But both of those, just like I never get tired of that sort of stuff, and it's just, some of it is just madly over the top. But what are some of the things? I know, Adrian, you were mentioning about some of the characters, some of the enemies. Like, what is it for you?
I love the kind of sense of humour in it as well. It doesn't take itself too seriously. I love the animation of the characters. Even when you shoot
It's
them,
beautiful. It's
and it's not loads of blood, is there? It's actually, the blood's not really. It's more water, isn't it? It's like
Which
it's not overly gory, I don't think, in a weird way.
It's not too gory, I don't think.
It's just little touches, like if you shoot a tank on top of a cliff. I'm getting merged into other Metal Slugs now, apologies. But little things like tanks falling down on top of you and turn into a zombie, and when you're like sick and
you vomit the blood everywhere.
It's absolutely incredible. And the way you just walk as a zombie, it's just so good.
Yeah, it just looks so appealing, doesn't it, when you're controlling something?
It's the detail. Like, even in the early levels of the first game, the bits where you're kind of going along the bridges, like the arch bridges, and then you've got the boats that are sinking, and it just did detail in the explosions, considering it is just pixel art. It looks so real. It's fantastic. Beautiful. And you've mentioned about the vomiting zombie. I can't remember which one is it. Which one is it where you get fat?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I'll come on to that. But it's from number 2.
From number 2. And he's got his belly sticking out.
I have played 2 a bit, actually.
It is just the humour, and it's just so appealing. And that's one of the reasons I always come back to it as well.
Yeah.
You know, games aren't all about graphics, but it's a big part of it. Oh. It's just a stunning game.
They're so different as well. Do you know what I mean? I can't think of much like that looks as cool and as kind of comical as not comical, but do you know what I mean? Like as appealing as that. It's just Dill?
Yeah. I haven't played them as much as you guys, but yeah, they're just fun. You can just like
they are great fun.
Skip into them, and it's like I love the sort of running gun.
Some running guns you pick up, and they're a bit too
Like
when we try and play Contra Free,
I was going to say, what do you think versus like Contra games? Like what? Because Contra games
they're more accessible, than Contra games.
They're still tough.
Contra games are a bit,
but they're just I don't know. There's so much fun to jump into.
2 players great as well.
Yeah,
playing with my son Tate is just so fun. We just kept doing game after game, and I was like, let's try another one. And you'd think you get bored of it, just literally shooting enemies, but it's just something about it. Love it.
Well, it's because the variation in enemies, though, isn't it? So even when you have like soldiers, each soldier will have like a different weapon, or they have a shield, or they'll have like a little car, or they'll be jumping off on a parachute, or there's like a water level where they've got like a full frog suit on and a barrel on their back and stuff. Yeah, it's a game that keeps on giving, but it is very appealing visually and also to play as well, and it's accessible, definitely. Yeah, and I think Contra's maybe for a bit more of a hardcore gamer.
Yeah, maybe.
Perhaps. Yeah. Because it's to pick it up and just play and you die right on the first level. It is hard. It is really hard. So that's what we know of it now. But what about the release in Japan and North America? Okay, what did they make of it there? So Metal Slug had very positive reviews with Japanese games magazine Game Machine listing it as the 7th most popular arcade game at the time. Wow. Now, I mean, you know, that time was pretty crowded market as it was anyway. So to be the 7th, I'd take that.
Just 95, did you say?
96. So the US saw it climb into the top 10 highest grossing video games of 1996. And there are some other accolades as well. So it appears in the 2010 book, 1001 Video Games You Must Play Before You Die. We've mentioned that a few times, that title. And multiple publications such as CVG and All Game credited Metal Slug for its amazing hand-drawn graphics and attention to detail and the multiplayer mode. Okay, just obviously opens it up so you can have multiple players on the screen. There were some criticisms from the likes of Electronic Gaming Monthly and GamePro, saying that the arcade version was very difficult because of the one-hit death system and would require a lot of coins to finish. Now, I had a bit of a beef with that comment because, I'm not being funny, you don't put an arcade machine in an arcade to sort of like not make any money, do you? I'll just put a 50p
arcade
in.
games are tough.
Yeah. Well, I'm just going to put 50p in and the fact that you can get all the way through to the end of it, and just finish it with that. That's just not right. Yeah. However, what are you going to say, Adrian? Go on. I know you're going to drop something in here. And it's something we've already seen, but it's got to be seen to be believed.
Keith will read a bit out. There was a tweet that went quite. I stumbled across it on Twitter. And there was a review, and we're not very negative usually. But who's the reviewer? What's his name?
His name is John Brown.
John Brown wrote a very interesting review about Metal Slug 3.
So what was this in?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
It's from a magazine, isn't it?
It's from a magazine. Do you want to read it? Are you happy to read this?
Yeah, I'll read a couple of bits. Metal Slug 3, a misguided ramble into gaming's best forgotten past. Come join us as we consign the age of 2 dimensions to history's trash can. Somebody has to make a stand.
John, what side of the bed did he get out?
I was going to say, John's got the ump. clearly, with Metal Slug.
Something else.
The way it ends
Yeah, no, that's true, yeah.
Metal Slug 3 doesn't care whether you like it or not. Truly, it doesn't. Hence the unkempt appearance, the violent mood swings, and the constant, incessant, nerve-pinging shouting in capital letters.
Is he not talking about his own relationship?
Wow. This is how he signs it off. Stupid, simple, 10p fun in controlled bursts. Too much Metal Slug 3 soon becomes tedious in the extreme. Fuck off, Grandad.
Hello.
I mean, to use the word scathing.
Wow.
He made an interesting point though, saying it's the forgotten past. So in a weird way, he had a point. So many people into the 3D game weren't there at the time.
But
I'm not defending him. But I actually kind of respect Metal Slug for sticking to their guns, literally and figuratively, and sticking to and they never went 3D, did they? Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, they didn't. And I think had they done so, it would have spoiled it.
Yeah,
big time, because they because it looked so, still looks so different, so crisp, so clean, so colourful and weird, and
that sums up an attitude, though, doesn't it? That we've talked about before, about how people suddenly became dismissive of 2D games like they were relics.
He says here, even a budget price tag can't quite excuse Metal Slug 3's many bad habits. Those in search of retro laughs should go elsewhere.
I just don't think he gets it.
Well, it clearly doesn't.
No, but I don't think he does on any level at all.
To be fair, he's got a few uppers and a few downers. He says uppers are mindless and impulsive, charmingly basic, retro cool.
Very
but the
passive
downers
aggressive.
is mildless and moronic, confusing in two-player, and sickeningly basic. I'm sorry,
Boo.
John Brown, if you're listening, do you still agree with this? Your personal opinions? Because I don't think they're correct.
No, I mean, I know for a fact that there's a lot of people that disagree with that, because there's a lot of love for Metal Slug. Well, any of the Metal Slug games, really. But I'm glad they stuck to their guns. I'm glad they stuck to the sort of graphics and the feel and the fact that it's crazy and comical and you get zombies that melt your face and all that sort of stuff. But, I'm glad they stuck with that, because in an age of where everything was moving from 2D to 3D, they went, no, we're going to carry on the way we're going. And they did right up until sort of 2008, with releases. So, and we'll come on to that in a minute. But yeah, so not fair at all, that review, I don't think. But anyway, does anyone agree
next
with
week's
it?
podcast, a retro gaming interview with gaming legend
John Brown.
journalist John Brown.
Well, is there anyone that agrees with it? That's what I would ask. I'd love to know if anyone agrees with it.
Everyone's entitled to an opinion.
I mean, outside,
it's
hit us
wrong.
up. Talk to us on the socials. So yeah, we go back to talking about the criticism of Metal Slug being difficult. Well, it needs to be a challenge, right? You don't just
It's
put it in
an
an
arcade
arcade.
game.
Exactly. You don't. You want this thing to make some money. And also when a player has completed the game, that the replay value is limited, and I've put debatable because we've already said that the game is very playable, very replayable, and in some of the sequels of the game, you can choose different paths. So
yes.
you can play it more than one way. So there we go. So how was it sort of rated by the wider community? So we're going to first have a look at our one of our go-to sites, good old Moby Games. Okay, their users have it at an overall of 4.5 out of 5, which is pretty highly rated. The sort of lower scoring end was the story and presentation. The sound and which was 4, sound and music 4.3, but then we've got at the very top, we've got graphics at 4.7, and an interesting sort of little section, personal slant 4.9. Now I can only assume that means how they personally feel about the game.
Yeah.
But so the game actually essentially is almost perfect in terms of a personal, like, how do you find Metal Slug? As a knee-jerk reaction.
Yeah.
4.9 is pretty good. Game ranking has it at 84.5, so not quite as high. Metacritic scores it at 7.3, so pretty solid. Yeah, not well beaten, but pretty solid. PC users on those versions, circa 75%, and releases on some of the newer systems have scores well over 80%. So it's interesting to see that even with newer releases, they, the scores are still holding up quite well, which is good. And that just kind of points to the fact that they've done well to stick to their guns. Had they changed, I think that would have nosedived. Yeah.
Yeah.
They also won an award for Neo Geo Game of the Year runner-up in March 1997. Anyone want to have a stab at what won that year?
King of Fighters 97.
Yes, it did.
Did they say the run and gunner up is that Metal Slug. That would be good, isn't it?
I love this. I need to get some photos of Dylan's face every time Adrian tells a joke. It's shocking.
I love it. This is my approval face.
I love it. I don't love it. So yeah, that was in Electronic Gaming Monthly, and it lost out, of course, to King of Fighters 97. So we're going to have a look at sales. The contentious point of sales. Now, as I've said before, and I've discussed this with you, Keith, on a number of occasions, they're extremely hard to find sales numbers, actual sales numbers for any kind of overall market. But it's really, some of them advertise them very freely, some of them you literally cannot find anywhere. There's a couple of sites I found which kind of had a rough European sales type thing, and I thought, that's not really giving us an in-depth kind of indication. So I'm not going to kind of feed you guys just, false numbers. So we don't really have actual sort of readily available sales numbers that I could find. If anyone else does get them, hit us up and let us know what they sold in terms of arcade boards and on the home console. That said, I do have some quite interesting and somewhat jaw-dropping numbers for you, though. So retail prices, okay, at the time in North America for Neo Geo games, and we mentioned we had a little pre-game chat, and we talked about this. So standard pricing, okay, for Neo Geo AES games came in at between $200 to $400 per game. Per game, you heard that right?
Yes.
Not the console. And some actually going for higher than that. With the most expensive title, Viewpoint, for the Neo Geo home console, going for nearly $800.
Wow.
I don't know about you guys, but that is just bananas. Yeah, $800 for a game, and that was retail price at the time. 1996, 97-ish. Yeah. So today, does anyone know anyone with? Well, I know someone with a Neo Geo. Definitely not selling.
I don't know anyone that rich.
Neo Geo titles are not only hard to find, but you essentially need a small mortgage to get a collection together. Yeah. So I'll give you an idea. So games now go from the low hundreds of dollars up to the likes of $1,600 for Super Dodgeball, $4,400 for Polestar, and a whopping $9,000 for World Heroes Perfect for the Neo Geo. So if you want to have a look at those, there's no doubt there are other examples of big price tag games, and obviously we come onto this thing about grading, and let's not get started on that because that's the way it's probably going to go. But these are just private sale.
Yeah.
Imagine spending $9,000. You've really got to want to complete a collection for that, haven't you? Yeah, $9,000 for that. You can pick up some other titles that were more freely available, and you can get them for like a few hundred, but still, that's not really within...
I wonder what SNK's business model was back then.
I don't know.
Was the plan just to make money in the arcades?
This is
the sales figures for the console and the games must have been so small.
Yeah. They did well in the arcades, but the home market was short-lived. It spiked for a bit, but the number one that I could find anyway, the opinion on the one reason why the AES failed was too expensive. Yeah. That was it. It wasn't anything else. It wasn't development. It wasn't how it looked. It was too much money, and most people just couldn't afford it.
No, most people. Any gamer back then and now would love to own one.
Oh yeah, without doubt.
It was just not.
I remember watching Games World on Sky One, and they often showed Neo Geo games. I was like, oh my words, look at this, King of Fighters and stuff.
Yeah,
and, like, this is crazy.
I just remember Neo Geo being like. I had a friend who he had a mate or something who worked for. He used to work in an arcade and fix machines, etc. And literally, the Neo Geo name was like when someone said it, it was almost like a godly kind of arcade level, and you were like, "Oh, it's on the Neo Geo," and I was like, "Whoa!" Do you know what I mean? Like you almost got that kind of, "Oh, it's a Neo Geo game," like because it looked. It just looked like something far more superior than what was around at the time. So, but they went for the luxury market and basically priced themselves out. So there we go. So we should all be experts on Metal Slug now, yeah?
Yes.
Not. But what about the rest of the franchise? Because we talked about some of the other games that we've played, so it's only right to kind of talk about them. Yeah, total of 7 games in the core series. Okay, which were produced between 96 and 2008, with versions of those originals being released for almost every single gaming platform you can imagine. Okay, along the way, the Neo Geo versions span 1 to 5.
Right.
Number 6 was on the PS2. and the Atomic Wave boards. Okay, and if you don't know what Atomic Wave board, it was a sort of a custom gaming board that was based around the Dreamcast. Have a look at it. It looks a bit strange, orange, isn't it? I think.
Yes,
orange sort of cartridge plug-in type thing. Custom. I've got down here custom arcade board based on the Dreamcast. Yeah. And only number 7. Number 7 was only released on the DS.
That's mad.
Ooh.
So a bit of a weird kind of
James
offshoot.
to only release it on the DS.
Yeah, a bit
That's
of. I
strange.
mean, I can understand obviously at the time because like when the DS was at its height,
It was a big
everybody and his dog had a DS. You know, it was massive, wasn't it?
Or
So-
even a Nintendo, which, it's true though.
I need to.
You set him up for that.
I did. I opened the door and he's walked straight through it. So adding all of the originals to remakes, spin-offs and compilations, you actually get a total of over 30 titles.
Mad.
I had it at about 23, which doesn't include like some later compilations and stuff like that. But yeah, 7 core games. Most people will probably remember 1 to 5.
Can you explain
The best.
Metal Slug 10 then to us noobs who don't understand
Yeah, there
it?
isn't a Metal Slug. It's an X, which was PS1, and there was an XX as well, I think.
Right.
But with that, there's a lot of like reworking and compilation type stuff. So you'll see a lot of crossover and things like that, like you have done with things like Mega Man series and all that other type stuff. Yeah. But there's you've got also now you've got it evolving into Android and iOS releases as well, which have been pretty regular and also very successful. There's a couple of Metal Slug games on the Play Store, and they're sort of 30 million, 40 million plus downloads.
Wow.
They've got a tower defense game. There's an original like Metal Slug 3, standard arcade game. And there's a Dylan will like this one. There's a Metal Gear Tactics.
Oh yeah, got your tactics, mate.
Got us some tactics. So each of the original iterations of Metal Slug feature, as we've already said, eye-popping graphics, crazy weapons, and enemies, but they do differ on several fronts. So this is, I know you spoke about fat mode, Keith, so we'll talk about that. But Metal Slug 3, for example, is considered by many as the best game in the series, due to its increased difficulty, large array of weapons, and even more kind of irreverent style of comedy. And so it does go completely bat poo crazy. But some other additions. So fat mode came in Metal Slug 2.
Ah, right.
So you run across, like when you shoot multiple enemies and things like that, if you shoot a lot very quickly with a high-powered weapon, like an enemy chaser, for example, which is a rocket that just locks onto your enemies, which is just ridiculously over. These rockets are about like 10 feet long, aren't they? And you shoot them out of a gun which is about 3 feet long.
Yes.
Yeah, this is great. But you pick up bananas and apples and, chicken and stuff like that. And if you run over too many, you literally get fat. You literally just turn into this enormous waddling kind of blob, and that's it. And after it's probably about a minute or so, I think, if you don't eat any more food, you then go back to normal. But it means you move slower, and you have this kind of like really weird blunderbuss gun, like this pistol, and it only shoots like 3 shots at a time, and it's just I don't know how getting fat means you can't. It's like that bit in Simpsons where Homer he tries to dial the numbers. Sorry, your fingers are too fat to dial. You can number 2 introduced us to mummification.
Oh, yes.
So if you get hit by a wandering mummy or a potion vial, you change into a sluggish, moaning mummy.
That is funny.
Capable of only using a pistol until you find an antidote. So you have to shoot enemies. And the thing is, because you move so slowly, obviously avoiding, attacks is difficult, and you can't jump. And that happens also with the zombies in number 3 as well. So you end up turning into, this blood fire breathing zombie. It's quite cool, the moves you can do, but again, you move slow, you shoot slow, and it's just a bit of a pain in the backside. Metal Slug 2 introduces us to the SV camel. Yes, which is essentially a camel in a desert level that has a Vulcan cannon strapped to the back of it.
Yes, very cool.
I mean, what? What were they smoking? Metal Slug 3 introduced branching routes. Okay, so the ability to choose a route to journey on, which was obviously a really new feature. Different enemies and vehicles along the way, such as being able to use a metal submarine called the Slug Mariner. Got there before you. That is actually the name, not the Submariner, the Slug Mariner. In a water level that we hadn't seen before. Other transformations, zombie, and a snowman.
That's right,
well. Later games also had features that they introduced, like twin submachine gun wielding, monkey transformation.
Yes.
And in number 3, you can also get a monkey sidekick as well. I wonder what that's a nod to, perhaps. Where did they borrow that from? You can get a little monkey sidekick. No?
Aladdin?
Surely. We're not thinking Donkey Kong here?
Oh, right, yeah.
Hello? And you can also, in some of the later games, you can have 2 weapon upgrades at once and choose between them. Yeah, which is quite cool. The most current iterations of the game can be found on mobile, Metal Slug Defense, and a reworked version of Metal Slug 3, which actually is pretty good. I thought that because they reworked it, they might have kind of tried to make it a bit too up to. They've kept everything pretty much original, just kind of taken out bugs, and it's really good to play, to be fair. Most of the classic library is actually available on consoles and PC, so if you haven't had a go, definitely have a go, because I think like the original game is like a few quid on any of the stores.
It's pretty accessible now,
like
isn't it? So.
Yeah. It's also part of a number of collections as well. So you might find if you've got like a classics collection, where you've got like an Evercade, or you've got a handheld, have a look, because it's probably on there, because you said you played it on the RetroPie, yeah?
Which I got unlimited credits, so that's why I like it.
That's how you completed it.
Yeah, basically. There's some bosses where you have to. I died about 4 or 5, maybe 10 times on a particular boss. I'm like, how much money would that cost me in the arcade?
Some of the levels are actually really hard. There's parts of the levels where there's just bullets flying everywhere. I mean, and that's one of the things I was going to mention, which we didn't talk about. You like in a lot of those kind of classic arcade games, if you run into an enemy, you die. Yeah, in Metal Slug you don't. So you can actually like walk into a soldier. It doesn't kill you to walk into them.
And if you get really close, you bring out
get the knife.
Exactly. Yeah. You have a knife. You have a combat knife situation where you can actually. You can do that to bosses as well if you get close enough, if you can. But you don't like on a lot of 2D platformers. Every time you hit an enemy, boop, done, finished. Obviously Mario, I'm thinking there, but a load of other games as well. But so 2001, we're going to pop back to SNK went bankrupt. Actually,
the end of Slug.
Yeah, that was that. Yeah,
that was the end of that era. Only 4 years after they released Metal Slug, they moved into a new company called Playmore, which would shortly after become SNK Playmore. They really do sit down. I hope they're not paying anyone to come up with these names, but they took the reins of producing later Metal Slug titles along with a company called the Noise Factory. And in 2016, Playmore was actually dropped and they went back to being SNK. So they are now SNK, but you will find, I mean, I've seen SNK Playmore thinking about it now.
Yeah.
If you look at, if you play classic games and certainly the last 20 years, Playmore's everywhere. There's so many places where I see Playmore and I was like, oh yeah. So the bottom line here is essentially, if you haven't got round to playing any of the Metal Slug games, you get it on the list. Would you agree? Even if they're not really your kind of thing, even if 2D sort of platformers aren't your thing, it's not a classic, not what you consider a typical 2D platformer. But there's literally something for everyone in there. They are funny. They are weird. Don't try and question what's in the games too much. Just literally play it. But yeah, I like the games. I actually played 3 and completed it at an ungodly hour last night, which I shouldn't have done because that means I'm tired this morning, but it was good. So
what's your favourite vehicle in the game? Because there's quite a few, isn't there?
I think it's got to be the sub.
Yeah.
The sub is hilarious because you just like, or the camel, I don't know. The sub's it's just so, like this little tin yellow thing that's like, how's that protecting you against anything? Like,
I quite like the jet fighter, actually. I mean, that's worked really well.
I used the helicopter instead, though. I didn't go the jet fighter.
Yeah.
They are, and that's the like the flying level where you get like guys parachuting.
So good.
Yeah, it's so good. It's so good because number 3 is almost all about aliens, isn't it? As well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
3's my favourite. I don't know if you can ask that question, but 3's my favourite. It's just I love the goofiness of it all.
Yeah, as I say, the general kind of community feeling is that 3 plays the best. 1 is obviously, a lot of people hold 1 in very high regard because it is the first Metal Slug game. And I'd imagine, like, just purely for like nostalgia and history, I'd imagine there are people that like the Gunforce games as well. I would have thought. Yeah, just purely, not necessarily because how they play. I think the first one plays better than the second one, but it still has the hand-drawn, backdrops, the sprites, all the weapons and stuff. So there's definitely, if you're a Metal Slug fan, you might like the Gunforce games just purely because of the nostalgia. So a little bit of trivia before we move on to our classic back of the box. Yeah, we love a bit of back of the box. So a bit of trivia. So the Metal Slug tank design, anyone watch any anime at all?
No.
Not really.
Okay, so the Metal Slug tank design, here's a bit of trivia for you then, has a striking resemblance to the tank in the anime Dominion Tank Police. So I haven't actually Googled this yet. So Keith, if you want, so Dominion Tank Police. Apparently, the tank has a striking because it's not a regular kind of tank. It's like really dumpy. It's got spiky tracks on it. It's very rickety and all this sort of thing. But yeah, I don't know. I've not seen. I think it rings a bell, but there must be anime characters.
It looks a little bit like
follows.
Advance Wars as well. So that's a really good game. The kind of tanks are similar.
Yes,
oh yeah,
it does.
That is a Metal Slug he's driving.
So, defeating the alien in Metal Slug 3 without taking any damage, or if you kill him with only grenades, you get rewarded with a little tiny UFO at the top of the screen. Little Easter egg
Didn't
there for
achieve
you.
that.
No, definitely not. That's actually, without taking damage. The end of Metal Slug 2 is actually a nod to the film Independence Day. Where a character flies his aircraft into the mothership core.
I saw that.
And anyone knows, what is it? Randy Quaid, isn't it? That flies in. Yeah. Mr. President! And he just.
Yeah, he done more than Will Smith in that film, didn't he? Let's be honest.
Yeah, a lot more. So yeah, there's a few bits and pieces for you. And then, of course, back of the box. Back of the box!
Back of the box.
What year was it released in?
96.
Yes, well done. What was the predecessors to the game?
Gun Force.
And
Gun Force.
yeah, they've been listening. This is amazing. So, Metal Slug is the original entry in one of the most famous action game series ever released. It was originally released by SNK in 1996. Players control Marco and Tama, who belong to the Special Forces team known as the Peregrine Falcon Squad. They fight to defeat General Donald Morden, not General Donald Trump, in an effort to take back their stolen weapon known as the Metal Slug. Players can utilise various weapons and vehicles such as the Metal Slug to sway the fight in their favour. Yeah?
Yeah, that sums it up pretty well.
Yeah. It's tough. I like it. Keith's got a nice...
Is it still back in the box?
No, it's not. No, that's the innovative one.
Can you read the back of that box?
Actually, it's fun because we have here actually a Saturn sort of repro type.
It's a backup to the official copy I own at home.
Yes, of course. The official copy.
Get back on the retro pie.
And as the tank definitely. I think they've just ripped that image off from what we just saw, that anime, the Dominion Tank Police. It just looks the same. But yeah, I can't read the back because, as you'd guess, it's in Japanese, so I definitely can't read that. We'll have to learn it for next time. So that's kind of the overview of Metal Slug, and actually the thing I was most surprised about, I thought it was just a kind of an original game, dreamt up, released, very straightforward into arcades, and it just wasn't. There were so many problems. There was like companies changing hands left, right, and centre. And actually, in the end, the fact that we had an arcade giant who basically took over and went, "Here's a load of money. Don't mess up. I think you're talented because you made these other games." I just thinking to myself, like, if he thought that the Gunforce games were great, they must have something about them.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Because otherwise he wouldn't have dumped that much cash to kind of, make Metal Slug. But it worked out kind of all right in the end. So, and that's right up to where we are today. Has anyone tried any of the newer mobile stuff at all? Anyone seen it? Anything like that?
Nope.
It's actually quite good. Some of the stuff is actually really quite playable. Very accessible. Pick up and play, 5-minute type thing.
Are they going to make a whole new proper Metal Slug, like Metal Slug 8? Is it 8?
I've got nothing that kind of suggests as such, but obviously SNK are kind of still around. So never say never, I suppose, because, there's a lot of history there. And as we know, a lot of the platforms now, and we talk about this a lot, I think, Sony are doing it. Xbox have really ramped up their back catalogue of classic games. And there's loads of platforms now coming out where you can revisit stuff very accessible, very cheap. Yeah. So why not? Yeah. I know for a fact from an Xbox perspective that you can get, there's a Metal Slug X. There's like a compilation and then 3 that you can get individually. But yeah, I mean, obviously it will differ from system to system, but even the mobile stuff's quite good. So, because they've kept all the original type of elements and they've made like a tower defense game as well. So, it's all good. So, final thoughts from you chaps. Anything surprising in there? Anything kind of unusual? Are you going to look at it differently playing it again?
I am surprised they didn't go 3D, and I'm pleasantly surprised because it's so easy in that era, in the late 90s, early 2000s ago. We've got a good IP here, but let's go FPS. Let's go 3D. And I'm so happy they didn't. I know they got those weird tower defense games.
A Metal Slug FPS would be pretty fun, though. Can you imagine
It
that?
could be actually.
yeah, but
It'd be a bit like
The
Duke
graphic
Nukem.
style.
Yeah.
Could you get away
Maybe.
with third person? Because like you'd have to.
You could do an over-the-shoulder thing. You could do loads of
Don't
stuff.
tease me. Don't tease me. Don't tease me.
Resident Evil remake.
Yeah, Metal Slug. Why didn't you go 3D and FPS? They were angry. aren't we?
Now's the time. Now's the time.
FPS,
It's
an
okay.
FPS Metal Slug.
Yeah.
Wow. Like that
There
would
you
that
go.
would be would there not be too much going on though?
Yes. It'll really be going on.
Can you imagine in
You wouldn't
VR?
be able to, like, you couldn't focus on anything in particular.
Oh man.
That would be that would be interesting. But yeah, guys, any final thoughts? Do you see it different? Understand it? A
No,
bit
I mean,
more?
obviously, the story of how it came to be is an interesting one. Like you, I figured
Roller
it would just be
coaster.
straightforward. Oh, yeah, here's this SNK arcade game that we all know. But
Except it wasn't an SNK game.
exactly.
Well, they published, but
Yeah.
they didn't make it.
but apart from that, I definitely echo the if you haven't played it, play it.
Yeah.
It's such for a run and gun, it's so accessible and it's just so much fun.
I think for one of those, it's one of those games that doesn't fit it snugly into a box. It's not just your typical 2D shooter, is it?
No,
so
definitely.
play it because it's quirky as hell and it's
Yeah.
funny. Deal?
Yes.
Yes. And on that note, what a
Thanks for the
inspiration
history
to us all.
lesson. Yeah, thanks for the history lesson.
But yeah, so there we go. We found out when it was released, what it went into it, and the fact there was a bit of a roller coaster and stacked loads of cash. But I'm glad they made it. I'm glad they stuck to their guns, like Adrian said, and pleasantly sort of surprised by all the other newer iterations of it as well. So if you like it, hit us up on the socials. Let us know. Tell us if you've completed any of them recently, and that's it, really, chaps. So until the next time, bid you farewell.
Thanks for listening to today's podcast. We really hope you enjoyed it. You can tweet us at Arcade Attack UK. We're also on Facebook at facebook.com/arcadeattackuk. Check out our website at arcadeattack.co.uk for lots more retro gaming goodness and to delve into our archives. Our podcasts are also available on Spotify, Stitcher, Podbean, YouTube and Apple Podcasts. Please leave us a review and a rating. We'd really appreciate it. If you'd like to support Arcade Attack, please check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/arcadeattack, which will give you access to exclusive podcasts, interviews, and other bonus content. So, until next time, take care, and we'll speak to you soon.